So for 2009, the organization sent out 16,000 surveys. We had a return rate pretty close to 40%, both Canada and the US. These numbers mean Canada was highly oversubscribed. Based on population alone, we had an unrepresentative number of survey returns considered in the practice analysis. So the practice analysis is focused to people who are new in sort of, 1 to 4 years, and it's questions about entry to practice. What do you do? How do you do it? How often do you do it? I don't know if I can figure out how to go back on this machine. That was the survey that was just before this. So out of all this, it comes out that at entry to practice, the practice of social work in the US and Canada are the same. There are no differences at entry to practice. And I really have to stress that because people will say, but society is so different in the States. Yes, it is. But again, this is looking at a small set of common competencies that it's accepted that every social worker should have when they start their first job. Okay? On the survey, and these are not my slides. You'll have to forgive some of the language. This actually comes from ASWB, and again, it's a number of years old. So in terms of significant differences in all of the tasks, and there's, I think, to actually do the online survey, did anybody remember doing it last time? It's like a 4 or 5 hour going through, reading, and it's clicking how important it is, how often you do it, whether it's an entry to practice competency. So when they compare US practice to Canadian practice at the bachelor's level, there were 26 tasks that were different. For the master's, there were 2 clinical.
Out of how many?
There's hundreds. I bet you there's, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just hundreds of them. But the overall result was that there's no real significant difference, again, at entry to practice, which would say Canada has to have a separate exam for social work. But we don't just stop there. You go on to, okay, so what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities? How do you write the questions so they're not just, multiple choice questions are super easy to write, especially if it's just recall questions. Higher order, multiple choice, very difficult. Then let's start factoring in rural versus urban practice. The broad range of social work practice between social policy to something like direct clinical practice. And all of that has to be factored in. So when you said, oh, those are really, really big categories, yeah, they are. But if you actually go back and look at the practice analysis, you can get a much better idea of where those things are focused in. Social workers who've been in practice for years generally fail the exam because they overthink the questions. They have too much knowledge in there, right? So, yeah, I know. So it's all put together in a blueprint. The knowledge, skills, and abilities are identified. Everything's weighted. They have psychometricians that go through the whole thing. So how are we doing for time? Well, everybody okay? Yes? Okay. How do you set a passing score? Especially on a computer-based exam. So the first question always is minimal competency. So they have a whole group that actually do it. There's a number of Canadians in here. Some people from VHA might recognize Elaine Helsel. This is just one of the groups. So all of the exams, all of the questions are rated, and all of the exams are equated. Because when computers, so when you go into the exam center, two of you can go in, sit down beside one another. Candidate A will get entirely different questions than candidate B. It's not the same exam. Okay? Candidate A's maybe have easier questions, but the passing score is going to be higher. Candidate B has more difficult questions, the passing score comes down because it's all equated. So it doesn't matter what the exam looks like. On a real difficult exam, the actual passing score may be 50%. On a real easy exam, it may be 95%. But at the end of the day, the psychometrics say it's testing for that, yes.
And difficulty would be based on how many people got it correct from that round of writing that question? How is the difficulty assessed?
Going through the development process, they're going to look at it, going all the way back to the survey, where you look at how often it's done, how critical it is to practice, and then not just that sitting, but going back to the, like the 30,000 questions. So when they pre-test, right, 170 questions, 20 of them are pre-tested, they're not scored. They don't tell you which ones they are. They're all sort of mixed in there. So, 10,000 people do the exam. They'll go and they'll look at that question to say, everybody got it right. There's something wrong with the question. Or worse, everybody got it wrong. There's something wrong with the question. But they also go to the level of the distractors. So they'll say, 90% of the people chose answer A, even though the correct answer is C, there's something wrong with the question or answer A. Because you shouldn't be getting that kind of incorrect answer. So highly analyzed, and again, I'm not saying that this is sort of the sliced bread of exams. No exam is perfect. Give us a better option. Interjurisdiction, it's all the same. There's no difference right across, although some use the BCSW exam to examine diploma people, and that score is lower than a BCSW pass rate. Okay, some more details. Anybody in a coma yet? Okay. So they actually pay item writers. There's item writers right across the country. They look at practice, jurisdiction, region, culture. They want a real broad perspective in terms of writing questions. 3-day intensive training, and any question that's written is reviewed. There's an exam committee that oversees the whole process. When they delete an item, it's obviously deleted. Some are returned to consultants to be redone, and improved items are sent off to be added. We've already talked about pre-testing. And it really is looking to collect those sufficient numbers so that they know the question is going to be testing what it's meant to test. So when we write an item, somebody will put together 10 questions. When it goes to the consultant, if they're lucky, 6 of them will make it through. So 4 of them will be rejected right off the top. When it goes to the exam committee, 4 of them will make it through. And actually going after pre-test, 3 questions will make it actually onto the exam. So that's the level of scrutiny of questions. Just because somebody writes a really good question doesn't mean it's going to go on. And they are really looked at from every perspective. to be as fair and objective as a multiple choice question could be. So it goes in, they do continue to monitor for problematic statistics. Looking for pass-fail rates. This is the states, okay? So first time, let's just focus on the bachelor's and the master's and the clinical. And again, for 2011, the scores have come up a little bit from there. 78% success rate, 83%, and for clinical, 78%. Clinical is really an entirely different beast. That's the flow chart going through the entire thing. So at the end of the day, this is what they and we are trying to achieve: a reliable, legally defensible exam that serves as a tool for public protection. So, questions? Lights? Oh.
Went way over there the last time. Michelle?
What's the cost to write the exam?
$230 US. Yep.
US.
Yep. Yep. Now, we are in the very early stages of looking at some way to offset that cost. Currently, when a new grad applies, they pay a lower rate than a normal applicant. The registration fee is generally $255. A new grad pays a rate of $200. So we're doing some analysis on how we can offset the cost of the exam, because we do recognize that it is an added cost. Although I was looking at a funny Twitter feed the other day. It was a young lady that just completed a degree out of York University in law, and she focused entirely on social justice. And she was saying, what are my chances of getting a job on Bay Street with a degree in social justice and $100,000 in debt? And the answer is not very good. So, but we are looking at different options.
Is it the same every time you write it?
Yes. Yeah.
There's a
Yes.
question.
I was just wondering, they have to show that they've actually graduated before they're allowed to write it, is that right?
You have to be approved to register. So if there would be an application that goes to the college. The college would check a number of things, including that you'd completed the program, and then approve you to challenge the exam.
So you could have a degree completion letter, but not a convocation?
Yes, 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 yes. We are looking at streamlining the process so that there is not a long delay in being able to write the exam. Ideally, we'd want people to be able to write, obviously at your convenience, but as close to completion as possible. Now, hang on a sec.
I wasn't sure if you addressed my question from before about different approaches to social work and
Yes.
like whether the exam is based on sort of a more kind of clinical mainstream that we might not really be learning as much in this program. It's more
Yes.
critical
to
and
reject
colonized. Yeah, we actually do learn to reject a lot of
Yes.
So which could be correct answers.
Yeah, well, what I was going to say around that as well, because when I went to the first meeting and I got to see the entire presentation about the exam process last spring, I left there feeling exactly like that. I said, I don't know how I'm going to go back to my school and convince people that you need to get registered.
Yes.
But having had the discussion many times and what our perspective is social justice, anti-oppressive work, and it's about critically analyzing systems and structures, right? And I think that when it's time to write the exam, we're going to be like that social worker who was practicing for a long time, because we're going to overthink it. So in my mind, I'm thinking, when you said that, I said that's how it's going to be for our students. We are working with John and the BC Association of Social Workers to have sessions around preparing for the exam. And perhaps the workshops here from our school to prepare for the exam. So we're having those dialogues now. One thing I do have to say, after coming from many sessions around this area, is my very first gut feeling was absolutely not. I can't really go there. However, having met many social workers who have been practicing in a field for so long, there's so much pride in the work that is done as social workers. And social workers are getting jolted consistently. Whereas one example was shared for law. So they have mediators for law. Typically those were social workers. And now law is saying, no, actually we don't need to hire. We can have someone act in this place, but we don't need a social worker. So for me, it's just, from what I'm understanding more, is around the protection of our profession, the protection of us and the kind of work that we do. And I think that, and working with students who graduated, or a lot in practicum, I work with a lot of students from practicum, and when you go into your placement, you're doing the actual day-to-day social work. Those are the things that I believe will be a part of the exam. So remember your practicum placements, and some of those really key concepts from there, I think, is going to be a big part of how you answer in the exam. So I think the big thing too is it okay to, we had a discussion last night with other Indigenous people around the whole idea of regulation, and there's actually, which was surprising to me, many of the delegated child welfare agencies are highly recommending that all their employees become registered and licensed, because and the perception is to protect them as social workers, so that they have backup. So when I'm starting to hear more of that, I have a better understanding of it. I still don't know about the social justice piece, but when he said people who've been practicing for 20 years often fail because they overthink it, I think that's how it's going to be for us. Yeah, because I think we've also had faculty from our school write the practice and fail. So we were talking about, and it's because of that, because we're overthinking, we're critiquing the whole process of how the exam questions are designed, how they're recruited, how the practice skills. We're constantly talking about different jurisdictions, I think, that came up. What happens in the north is completely different than what would happen here, and yet it has to be the same. So all of those questions are on the table. I'm guessing that perhaps after a couple of years maybe of the exam, there is an opportunity to revisit and look at what's working and what isn't working. So I think I feel comfortable in saying that it's not set in stone, that there's probably going to be a lot of lots of advocacy around relating to what constitutes social work here in British Columbia compared to other provinces.
Well, and Canada. So to answer your question, there are questions around oppression and anti-oppression and social justice that are built in. They're not high-level questions because we're talking about your first couple of days on the job, okay? So it does really go back to what Jackie said. If you focus on, a practicum and what you were actually doing. So yeah, there's a fair amount on assessment. There's a fair amount on interviewing because that's what the profession says are critical components for success at entry level. And that's, it's not to diminish, it's not to criticize any school. The focus on anti-oppression and social justice is a fundamental part of social work, not on your first day. So if you come out and all you know is social work and anti-oppression, and you go to your first job and a health authority says there's a family in there, go and do an interview, and you can't do the interview, that's a problem from a minimum standard perspective. So going again all the way back to that practice analysis, when the profession says, because this isn't the college, this isn't me, it's not a small group of people, the guy that does this presentation from ASWB is a white guy from Iowa, and people have said, oh, it's written by a white guy in Iowa. Well, no, it's not. All of this comes from the profession itself. So, that's where we find it really kind of hard to answer questions specifically like this, because there's a number of schools, UVic included, which have an anti-oppressive focus. But the profession over here says these are the minimum set of competencies. So the discussion I've had with lots of schools in BC, and in fact right across the country, is within your program, do you teach that minimum set of competencies? And not one school has said, no, we don't. Okay? There's some questions about what those competencies look like. And that's open to debate. Let's have that debate. Is it going to change the implementation date? Probably not. Because again, when the profession says these are the things that matter on your first couple days on the job, it's pretty hard for somebody to say, oh, well, yeah, we're just going to push that to the side and do something else. Now, if you're going to take your degree, your social work degree, and go into social policy work, and we do have people with social work degrees in the Ministry of Health, the Ombudsperson's office, I think there's somebody in the representative's office. They don't call themselves a social worker. They call themselves something else, and they do that work.